Well, Dr. Varner, thank you for this class. I've really enjoyed it, and I think the materials have been great, and I'm really enjoying putting together this presentation. So let's get into Psalm 10. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Why do you hide yourself? Is the title of it. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? In arrogance the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. For the wicked boasts of the desires of his soul, and the one greedy for gain curses and renounces the Lord. In the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are on high out of his sight. For as for all his foes, he puffs at them. He says in his heart, I shall not be moved. Throughout all generations I shall not meet adversity. His mouth is filled with cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He sits in ambush in the villages. In hiding places he murders the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. He lurks that he may seize the poor. He seizes the poor when he draws him into his net. The helpless are crushed, sink down, and fall by his might. He says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. Arise, O Lord God, lift up your hand. Forget not the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? But you do see, for you note mischief and vexation, that you may take it into your hands. To you the helpless commits himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and evildoer. Call his wickedness to account till you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations perish from his land. O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, so that man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. I'm going to kind of get a bigger picture here because I've come to really appreciate getting a big picture, and we've done a lot of that in this program. So I took the liberty recently of watching a couple Bible Project videos because they're really good at that as well. And kind of this topic plays itself into and throughout the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, the wisdom literature. And I like the way the Bible Project videos describe Proverbs like a brilliant young teacher that knows all there is about life and wisdom and how to act. She has positive views about the direct connection between how you live and what you reap in life. It's clear. You live this way, you reap certain benefits from that. And if you live the wrong way, then you'll receive your just due in life. It's a direct cause and effect between those two. So Proverbs kind of tends to emphasize that. Ecclesiastes is like a very intelligent skeptic who sees the oftentimes disturbing contradiction between the success of the righteous and the wicked. It seems like, what I mean by that is, the wicked seem to prosper and the righteous suffer, and there just seems to be a contradiction. It doesn't seem to be directly like what you would think it should be in Ecclesiastes. He wants you to grab hold of real meaning in the midst of vanity, in the midst of this emptiness. And lastly, the book of Job is like an old man who has seen it all and understands the difficulty of faithfulness to Yahweh in the midst of trial and tribulation. Now, the reason I mention that is because I just want to get the bigger biblical picture of the issue that this psalm brings out. Psalm 10 is a prayer and an act of worship to Yahweh in the midst of the struggle to see life in this context between the situation, if you will, of the wicked and the situation of the righteous, and God's justice in the midst of all that. So the illocution. The psalmist invites the listener to witness his distress on the one hand at the success of the wicked in this life, but on the other hand, he wants us to witness his supreme confidence in the end that Yahweh is king forever and he will bring justice. So that's basically what he's bringing out in this psalm. And the perlocution, I believe, is the psalmist wants us to join him in this brief journey in recognizing the apparent injustice of the wicked, but coming to grips with the fact that God will right all that wrong in the end. So he wants us to join him in worshiping Yahweh. And kind of, in a sense, that's all the Psalms, in a sense, is wanting us to join in worship of Yahweh. But this psalm is in the context of confidence in God that he's going to bring justice. Psalm 10 in the Hebrew Bible, as well as the Greek Septuagint, according to your book, Awake, O Heart, says that it is, together with Psalm 9, Psalm 10 and Psalm 9 are seen in one in the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Septuagint. Therefore, every psalm in the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Septuagint after Psalm 9 is one off from our English version. The background. So the background, you can kind of go to Psalm 9 for the background of Psalm 10 if that's true. And so the beginning of Psalm 9 says Almut Laban, hope I'm pronouncing that right, which means concerning the death of a son. This could refer to the death of Absalom, and I found that indicated in the pulpit commentary too. They kind of talked about that. Or it could be a messianic reference to the preceding Psalm 8. They didn't really talk so much about that, but this makes it somewhat difficult in a sense, because this is meant to include Psalm 10, and the two seem somewhat contradictory. There is more praise and less desperation in Psalm 9 than in Psalm 10, even though there are similarities that thread themselves through both. There is a reference at the end of Psalm 9 to the fact that the Lord shall not forget the needy or afflicted, he will judge the nations. This could be tied to the beginning of Psalm 10, where David asked the question of why the Lord seems to stand away while the wicked prosper. The pulpit commentary indicates that while the Psalm 9 talks about the Goyim, or the Gentiles, Psalm 10 talks about the wicked Israelites. So there's kind of that difference to take into account too. So it seems there's a few difficulties in combining the two, and yet there's a sense in which they could be seen together as well. So there's similarities and dissimilarities. I did my own outline of Psalm 10, and I did it perhaps a little differently. David's, I have my first point is David's question in verse 1. And number 2 is David's enemies, verses 2 through 11. And number 3 is David's request in verses 12 through 15. And number 4 is David's confidence in verses 16 through 18. And that's really where you could almost call that David's worship in verses 16 through 18. I looked for chiastic structure over the whole psalm, and I believe that it was a little bit hard to find chiastic structure in the psalm, and I don't think that there's real clear chiastic structure in every part of the Bible. That book by Gentry that we read for the last class was really good about clarifying where a lot of it is, but I think that this psalm is more of an enumeration of the sins of the wicked, David's request to Yahweh, and his reason for confidence in the end. It's kind of not necessarily chiastic, but I would be curious to hear what others would think of that as well. verse 1, there's parallelism in the psalm. There's parallelism throughout it, and I kind of was curious to see how there was how the different types were throughout it. So synonymous parallelism I see in verse 1, because David kind of states the question of Yahweh and then he repeats the question and in a different way. And verse 2 seems to be, for example, synthetical parallelism to me, because the psalmist indicates that the wicked pursue the poor, and then he states, let them be caught in their schemes. So we're gonna start to walk through the psalm now, Psalm 10, and verse 1 is David's question. And actually, there's examples of David's question elsewhere throughout the Bible as well. So, for example, there's Isaiah, who says, "Verily, you are a God that hides yourself," in 45:15, and Job also complains, "He hides himself on the right hand, that I cannot see him," in Job 23:9. And similarly, obviously, I mean, I've said it before, one of my favorite books, Habakkuk, I had to bring up him. Also cried to the Lord for the wickedness in the land in the beginning of chapter 1 in his book. So it's a common problem in all of life, the wickedness of the wicked and how God's justice is seen in the midst of the trials, the tribulations, just the presence of evil in the world. And David really has to cut straight to that in verse 1, and he just asks the Lord, why is this here? And then my second outline point is David's enemies in verses 2 through 11. So let's get into verse 2 now. Verse 2 indicates David's desire that the wicked be caught in their own schemes because they hunt and take advantage of the poor. Pretty straightforward. Verse 3 illustrates the heart of the wicked, kind of talks about their inner person. David says that they boast of their own desire and they curse and renounce Yahweh. Verse 4 shows that the wicked disregard Yahweh at best. It indicates that his thoughts, that the wicked man's thoughts are that there is no God. Verse 5 demonstrates the difficulty of the psalmist, i.e., that the wicked prosper and he snuffs or puffs at his own enemies. And I see so much of that attitude, just to kind of get practical for a moment, I see so much of that just at work. I mean, I work at a local home improvement store, and there's a lot of young guys that go to work there, young guys and gals, and they just have a cockiness, have an arrogance, foul language, foul topics, a lot of sexual jokes. To them, evil is a joke, and there's a proverb that talks about that: to the evil man or to the fool, wickedness is a joke. And I see that so evidently in just the way that they talk about their enemies at work, or in life elsewhere. It's a common theme. It's a common attitude that the wicked have. Verse 5 demonstrates the difficulty of the psalmist. Sorry, I just talked about that. Verse 6 shows the wicked man saying in his heart that he will not be moved. There is no one that he is afraid of anymore. Verse 7 narrows in on the mouth or the tongue of the wicked, where he is seen speaking evil and mischief all the time. Verse 8 shows him sitting in ambush and murdering the innocent. And verse 9 kind of brought some thoughts some practical thoughts to mind. Verse 9 offers a striking image of the wicked as a lion, and in addition to that, he draws the innocent people in like a net. He's very much intentionally evil, and I thought that is so. When I hear this particular radio program, for example, it's a Christian radio program where they talk about living intentionally, and here, it's almost as if in their minds, not living intentionally is the problem. As if you're living on accident, bad things happen. If you're making mistakes, there's problems in your life. So it's kind of like the accidental life is the problem. Seems to be implied anyway in my mind. So living intentionally, I mean, here's an example of the wicked living totally intentionally evil. They're intentionally evil. So it almost seems like intentionality is not the crux of the issue in our lives. It's not living purposefully. It's just deciding to either live to please Yahweh, or in our New Testament context, Jesus. We're seeking to please our Lord instead of live for ourselves. But either way is intentional. So to me, that's just in contrast to kind of the anemic perspective that pop psychology tends to bring to the table. And it does seem to be very anemic to me. I've never been into pop psychology. Verse 10 shows us again the victimization of the wicked that they bring. And verse 11 demonstrates the reason why the wicked think that they can get away with all of the above. He believes that God does not hear and he cannot see what he is doing. David's request. This is my third bullet point. David's request in verses 12 through 15. Verse 12 begins David's turning away from the problem and to the problem-solving and all-knowing Yahweh. And at some point, we all have to do this. At some point, okay, here's the problem in our lives, and here's what we see as the issue, and we need to look up to the Lord and look away from our problems and look to the covenant-keeping God, the one who fulfills all promises, the one who, in the context of this particular psalm, he's just. He's going to bring justice. He's not going to just allow the wicked to prosper. There's ultimate satisfaction of his justice in the end times, when everyone who's ever not lived under the lordship of Jesus is cast into hell. And there's a sense in which that's finally satisfies God's justice. And in the meantime, God is patient, and there's a way in which we have to be patient, but still look to him to bring justice in temporal ways in this life, and if not finally and fully in this life, then he will in the next. Verse 13 is where David asks why the wicked say that God will not call them to account. Verse 14 answers the question, showing that God does hear, and he is not in the least unaware of the evil. Verse 15 calls on Yahweh to break the arm of the evildoer. And so this is all David's request. And the fourth bullet point is David's confidence. Verse 16 opens in worship, saying that Yahweh is king forever and the nations perish from his land. Verse 17 demonstrates Yahweh's faithfulness to the afflicted. He will deliver them. And verse 18 ends with confident trust in Yahweh's justice and his ability to carry it out. So again, it's that worship at the end that forms the heart of the psalm. It's the worship. It's the turning to ascribe all value and trust and perfection, just all the beauty of Yahweh in all things. Just turning to ascribe all that to Him, and understanding that He's King forever. He's going to punish. He's going to bring justice. He's going to bring meaning and He does. He totally fulfills all those things now, in a sense, and He will perfectly fulfill them in the end. And I love that. I think anybody could tell that. I love it when Yahweh is exalted, when Jesus is exalted, and when the Lord is seen as supreme over the apparent difficulties and trials of this life. Momentary light affliction, Paul called it. And, in a sense, it is. It always will be momentary and light, because God's gonna make everything right in the end, and we just need to wait on Him. And I'm out of time. It's 21 minutes, but I really did enjoy this, and I think I had a little bit of an awkward start, but I love doing this project, and I love this class, and I really appreciate the time that you put into educating us, Dr. Varner, and I hope that you have a blessed Christmas. God bless.